I thought it'd be a good time to talk about Rite of the Nine and whether or not it is worth your time to play this event. And, well, there's multiple reasons to do this event, and I'll just explain what it is in case you don't know anything about it. Basically, it's similar to Pantheon, except it's not a boss rush mode. It's more like a refresh for dungeons, the entirety of dungeons, and it makes it so, there's a little bit of a twist to each encounter. It doesn't work exactly the same, but again, this is mostly for the ultimatum mode, which is supposed to be the hardest version of the dungeon, similar to a contest mode, and for all of the dungeons that are reprised in this activity. They didn't have a contest mode back in the day because that was before it was implemented for new dungeons. Of course, Vespers, Host, and Sunder Doctrine are the only two to have a contest mode, at least officially at this point. Really, these wrinkles are for seasoned players who have done the dungeons a bunch of times, and you don't want to make it the same because it'll get boring, it'll be too easy, and I think there's enough in there, at least for Spire of the Watcher, to throw a curveball here and there. But once you get it down, it's like you've learned the whole thing again, and it doesn't really matter too much. Now, for newer players, we have this mode called Explorer mode, which is very similar to how the Nether works, in the fact that it's just, do what you want, kind of mess around, but it's also a tutorial for the dungeon, which is really, really cool to see this stuff in game. 9 times out of 10, when someone has a question, you can just say, go watch a guide on this, when it comes to stuff in Destiny, whether it's a dungeon or a raid or an exotic quest. But yeah, in-game tools don't really help you out with a ton of this stuff. And this is a great way to allow newer or returning players who have never perhaps touched this content, right, to explore and figure this stuff out. And if you ever wanted to solo a dungeon, this is the best place to do it, because you don't have to look up a guide. You can just hop right in and let the game help you out, essentially, or at least give you pointers. Now, if you don't want to do that and you want to go in blind, that's totally your choice. Eternity mode is kind of a middle ground for that. If you just want to chill and grind the manifolds or try to get some of the weapons, which I don't know why you'd want to get the weapons from Spire. They are not good. We'll have to see about the rest. I don't think there's any weapon in this entire event that's super good, which does kind of hurt it. But I think if anyone's playing this activity for the weapons, you're kind of like, that's suspicious. Nobody really played Pantheon for the weapons. It was more so for the challenge and for the title. And I have to say, Eternal is a pretty nice title. It's in all caps too. There are very few titles that have that, and this probably won't be a super rare title. Godslayer was supposed to be, and it never really ended up being that rare because the community is great about carrying people through certain things and giving them a chance to do it. And I think the very same thing will happen here. You don't need a full fire team of 6, so it's a little bit easier to find a group, whether you're LFGing or just trying to get a couple friends into the game. You can take them through Explorer mode if they don't know the dungeon, and then maybe get them set up to do ultimatum at some point. And another thing that's actually really nice about this event, and some people might not like this because it does take away a bit from the rarity of the title, and the fact that we have until July 14th, basically until Edge of Fate comes out, to get this title done. And I can't remember, I think Pantheon was around the same amount of time. I could be wrong, but Pantheon, I would argue, was a lot harder, even though we haven't had the hardest dungeon drop yet, which is probably going to be Ghost of the Deep. I can say with a small amount of confidence that it's not going to be nearly as bad, right? We don't have as many bosses as we did in Pantheon. I don't think the difficulty is quite as high as a contest mode would be. Maybe I'm wrong about that, because we just know how everything works in these dungeons, so we're not faffing about trying to figure out what to do, when to do it, and so on. You already know what to do for the most part if you've played these dungeons in the past or you've watched a guide. So, with Pantheon, the difficulty was super high. You had things that just made it super hard to complete the encounter, on top of trying not to be killed by ads all the time. I just have flashbacks to Explicator, the encounter from Ron where you fight the Cabal dude, and you're standing on your plate doing your thing, killing the Colossus to get the buff and whatnot, and just a fire tornado spawns out of thin air. That was like the worst thing about Pantheon, I think. Of course, Nezarec was decently hard, but you know, just being killed by that fire tornado was equally as painful. Whereas with this, you're gonna encounter frustrating things, right? Being killed by a random supplicant. I'm sure moths in the final encounter of Ghost will mess you up, and maybe there'll be just more of them as, you know, a change to that encounter. Who knows what will be there? Maybe there'll be Lucent Hive out and about in that main arena where you can fight Samuma as well, and that would suck because usually they're tucked away in the side rooms, right? But imagine they're just hanging out in the center all together. Yeah, that would suck. But you know, these things change in the new reprised version of this dungeon here, and you know, you learn how to deal with it. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of practice and getting things down, maybe running a loadout you've never ran before, because not swap is a thing, which by the way, it doesn't seem to really affect some of the more powerful swaps. I know I kind of said this in an older video. If you're swapping from Speaker's Sight to Sanguine, you can just pop your well down first and then swap to Sanguine, and you're still going to get the times 4 damage boost. So it doesn't really mess around with that too much. So not swap is not that big of a deal if you ask me. The outrage was a little bit overdone, and you know, that's something that the Destiny community specializes in sometimes. So I'm not saying everyone does that, but you know who you are. Overall, I think the rewards for this aren't fantastic. I do think the title is really cool. I just think as a game mode and in general, Explorer is something that should be implemented in many things. You know, guided games was supposed to be that for raids forever ago. Didn't really work out, and I just think in general you need an Explorer version of some of the campaigns, or maybe for destinations to help people figure out what they need to do. And you know, certainly something that's exciting from a perspective of, I want to bring people into this game, but there's so much stuff you have to tell them, there's so much hand holding you have to do in order to help them figure out the game. And then let's say they're interested in the lore. Yeah, just go watch like a 10-hour Byte video to understand everything. Who has the time to do that while also playing the game? I guess you could do that, right? Listen to Byte while you're playing the game. But like at the same time, that's insane. You should be able to experience the story and the lore in game, so you don't have to go watch a Byte video. Now, Byte does great work. I'm not saying you shouldn't watch Byte. I'm just saying you shouldn't have to understand what's going on in the game. And please advertise stuff like the timeline in the game to help people find that stuff and get a grasp at least on what has happened in what order, because there are people who just say buy something like the Legacy Collection, right? And they don't know what order to play that stuff in because, you know, they haven't played the game ever, or they're just coming back and they've maybe tuned out on that stuff until now, and you know, they need that assistance, just, you know, a little nudge in the direction of where they want to go or should go, whatever. But rant over. Rite of the Nine, really cool concept, and I hope there's more stuff like this in the future. Maybe another version of this event with different dungeons or something like this, where we have another Pantheon, but there's also an Explorer mode that allows you to learn the encounters so that you can do that Explorer mode and then maybe challenge yourself on the contest level difficulty in order to, you know, challenge yourself after you've in fact learned those encounters. Yeah, that's it for me. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Leave a like as well if you did. Comment down below if you've been playing Rite of the Nine, if it's gotten you back into the game. I know a lot of people are probably going to be coming back because of Renegades, and you know, now's a perfect time, I think, to jump in because Rite of the Nine is free. At least I'm pretty sure it's free, and so you can try out all these dungeons for free. If you want to buy them, you can buy the dungeon keys, but that's probably a lot of money, so I recommend it if you enjoy the dungeon, but if you don't, don't bother. Anyways, see you guys.